All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Universe Sports Talk here in the Brim Hall building. Caleb Turner and Jackson Payne back at it.
What's up, everybody? Here to talk basketball, talk about maybe some football rumblings that we've been hearing about and anything else in the sports world and in our world. So Thanks for tuning in. Let's get to it.
Got the Hustle Award back. We got our ladies in the back hustling, the women's basketball team.
Back on the set today, yeah. Haven't been back in the podcast corner in a few weeks.
Feeling.
At the Annex last week with Tegan Graham and Maria Albiero from women's basketball with Lee Camard as well. And on the Marriott Center floor 2 weeks ago, where we got some shots up, as you saw. But
Yes.
It's good to be back where we belong, back at home.
For sure. And, as I said, we got the women's basketball team back here. They got another win last night. Got the sweep weekend sweep, I should say, over San Diego with a game on Saturday and Monday. And pretty convincing victories, even though kind of came out a little bit slow last night to start the game. We're held to, I believe, 12 points in the first quarter. Which is, I imagine, got to be a season low for them in a quarter. But we're able to turn it on second quarter, second half, and Shaylee Gonzalez and Lauren Gustin and Paisley Harding once again leading the way for our Lady Cougs.
The usual suspects,
Yeah, seriously.
That starting five does some serious damage. And then you see Sarah Hampson coming off the bench.
Yep.
Emma Calvert got some good minutes yesterday. Nani, they're a deep team.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of contributions from the starting five, but I think the most exciting thing about this women's team, besides their potential to go as far as they can this year, is what they'll do in the years going forward with Shaylee sticking around for 2 more years. Lauren Gustin's only a sophomore. And obviously losing Maria, losing Tegan, losing Paisley's going to hurt a lot. But the future's bright. Coach Judkins knows how to recruit, and we're starting to see some flashes from those younger prospects on the end of the bench. So, and who knows? Maybe we'll be steamrolling teams here for a few more years going to the Big 12. But we're excited.
Speaking of kind of the usual suspects, for that team, I know you've coined the term in your articles, Killer G's.
Killer G's.
So you got Gonzalez, Gustin, and then Tegan Graham, usually a part of that trio. We had Tegan on the podcast last week, and she's kind of had her typical role of doing whatever the team needs, right? Whether it be passing, defending. She had, I think, 3 steals in the first half last night against San Diego, which was pretty impressive. Not shooting the ball maybe as well as she would like to right now. But that's the great thing about this team is that, you never know on any given night who's going to show up, who's going to be kind of that killer of the Killer G's. And she can go off for 10 3-pointers in a game like she did earlier this season, or she can contribute in other ways. So I think we're just kind of seeing that, Coach Judkins, like you mentioned, has this team that has such a strong identity and knows who each other are and have that trust among each other that even when one person's having an off night, it just, next woman up.
Yeah, exactly. And Tegan being such a prolific 3-point shooter, as we've seen this year, even when she's not hitting from 3, she's still such a threat because when they pass it out to her outside the arc,
you have to guard it.
You have to guard it. You swarm, and it opens up something else. And Tegan's one of the best passers in the country. Coach Judkins has said time and time again. And so she just dishes underneath. She finds Lauren. Lauren's got 2 points. And Chauvin gets to the line, too. So
yeah, seriously.
We're seeing a lot of good things from their offense, especially the defense, too. Definitely clamped up yesterday. That was probably why they won the game. That's what Coach said after.
Yep.
I found it interesting how 12 points in the first quarter, not ideal. Probably their lowest showing of the season, as you said. But they finished with 70 points, and it was 35 in both halves.
Wow.
So it all worked out. And the fourth quarter was pretty dominated by the bench minutes.
Yeah.
Toward the end, things started to fall away a little bit, and so Lauren and Shaylee came back in. But the team competes. We know that. They go out and get the job done. 8 straight wins for women's basketball, 16-1 overall, 16th in the country. All 8 wins since the Oklahoma loss have come by double digits.
Yeah. Holy cow.
Unreal.
Yeah, and this is a great week for them, especially, they have 3 home games this week to get some great exposure just on campus. I feel like for fans, you have a 16-1 basketball team on campus, and they have 2 more home games this week. Like, people have to come out and watch this team, right? Greatest show on earth, as we said before. Just playing just peak basketball right now. Hopefully we can get that 3-point shootout happening between Tegan Graham and Alex Barcel, as you mentioned. That is in the works, so stay tuned for that. But just a lot of exciting things coming up this week with 2 more games for women's basketball. If you haven't had a chance to check them out, man, this is a prime opportunity. And it's going to be 2 good teams.
It's 2 good teams, yeah. So far, WCC play has been, I don't want to say easy, but compared to what their non-conference schedule is going into it, where you're playing teams like Washington State, Florida State, West Virginia, Oklahoma, then having to go and play a Pepperdine or a San Diego isn't quite the same.
Yeah.
These two teams that they're about to play, I believe it's Santa Clara and then San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two very solid programs. It'll be the biggest test that they've had within the conference so far because they very well could run the table in the conference.
Yep.
Is it realistic? Probably not. But a one-loss conference stretch,
Right.
very
That's it,
possible,
yeah.
I would say. And San Diego, playing them back-to-back, playing them twice in two times in 3 days, wasn't ideal, but with COVID, just kind of had to happen that way. But San Diego was very aggressive. They ran a lot of full-court press defensively. They were just kind of a thorn in their side the whole time. I felt like it was two very chaotic wins, especially early in both games.
Yeah.
Because I believe BYU led San Diego by 4 at the half on Saturday, and then they only had 12 points in the first quarter yesterday. So San Diego knew how to kind of disrupt BYU. They kind of had some way to slow them down at least. Obviously, the Cougars pulled it out at the end. And so I think a lot of teams in the conference are looking at what San Diego did and going, okay, this is how maybe you're not going to be able to stop them clearly because we talked about you got the Killer G's, you got Paisley, you got a lot of different playmakers and a lot of different scorers. But if you can slow them down or maybe just like throw a wrench into what they try to do, you have a shot to take them down. So I think a lot of teams are looking at what San Diego just did against BYU and getting a lot of hope from that, especially San Francisco, Santa Clara. They did beat San Francisco already on the road. And winning in the Marriott Center is, you just don't do it. So I feel like there's a lot of pride within the program about winning at home, protecting the court, protecting the court. And it's 2 tough wins. Coach Judkins said it's going to be a real test for them. But I no doubt in my mind they're going to be 18-1 by the end of the week. So you heard it here first.
You're going to get the chance to send out 2 more tweets this week.
Love sending those tweets.
Exclamation points.
Love sending those tweets.
But, speaking of, can this team run the table in conference play? I think it's possible. A team like Gonzaga on the men's side has done it in the WCC. It's not easy to do. Obviously, if it was easy, more teams would go undefeated in a season. It's not super easy. But having said that, I think if there was a time for BYU to drop a game, it probably would have been yesterday, given the fact that San Diego had just played them, kind of had a good scouting report, had a good idea of what they could do to kind of throw a wrench in things like you mentioned, and throwing in another wrench of not having practice on Sundays. So you play a game Saturday, don't practice Sunday, come home to Provo on Monday, have to get a practice in and play the same team you just played 2 days ago, and don't have a great start. It would have been very easy after that 12-point quarter for BYU to just be like, well, I don't know if it's really in the cards today. We're trying our best. Had a lot of turnovers again. That was kind of a big trend that we've been seeing with this team. And the fact that they just turned it on, and like that just shows the mark of a really just a great program, great team. Where even in those games where it would have been so easy to just give up and so easy to lose, San Diego had great size, whereas BYU's starting a starting 5 is not super big. Playing Lauren Gustin at the 5. She's a great rebounder, obviously, but there were a couple times where San Diego would throw in. They had a big 6'4" player that they would throw in, and she was huge. She was giving Lauren Gustin fits on defense, and so it was certainly in the cards that could have been the one that they dropped, and the fact that they didn't, I think, says a lot about just what this team's capable of.
Yeah, this team just doesn't stop. They score. I talked about it earlier. 35 points in both halves. They were up pretty sizably toward the end. They didn't have a lot of their starters in, and they're still scoring, whatever it takes to get points on the board. I think the stars have totally aligned for this team to run it back one more year, have that chance to run the table in the WCC. But it's exciting. It
certainly is. Yeah,
there is a lot to be excited about. I personally, would I like them to run the table in WCC? Yes, I would, but I don't want this team to get embarrassed in the conference tournament the way they did last year. Right. And if dropping a game,
well, I don't know. I don't know if embarrassed is the right word, because we talked about it with Tegan. The way that they were eliminated from the tournament it's
a little sketch.
Obviously, a very close game. They fought to the end, and it was on a game winner that probably shouldn't have counted.
Embarrassed is not. They didn't get embarrassed last year, but it was deflating.
They ended up hitting a wall at the wrong time.
Right, and they obviously did win a game in the tournament. Yeah. Which is very important. But for this team, for how good they are, for the target that they have on their back that just keeps getting bigger and bigger every game, it would be really embarrassing to lose in the conference tournament. Right. If that's your first conference game, and it is really hard to beat a team 3 times in college basketball. Yeah. I've said it before. beating it's like in college football. It's really hard to beat a team twice. When you have a rematch in a conference title game, that's often going to be a very difficult game on your schedule, even if you beat them the first time. And in college basketball, it's the same way. That's why when BYU plays Gonzaga in any conference final, no matter what happens in the season series, you know it's going to be a good game because it's really hard to beat a team 3 times. Gonzaga does often because it's Gonzaga. But we've made this Gonzaga with BYU women's basketball parallel, and I guess there's only one way to see if it's true, and it's how they finished the year. Still a lot of basketball left to play. Bracketology-wise, I think I've seen them as a 4 seed.
I've seen as high as a 3, I think, but 4 sounds right for the most recent,
And if they're a 3 or a 4, I believe they get to host
Yep.
the first 2 rounds of the tournament, which would be unreal.
That would be cool.
Imagine The Rock pulling up for March Madness basketball.
Insane.
At the Marriott Center. Just unreal.
Yeah.
Imagine. Show up, Rock. 2 months. You got 2 months.
You know, I will say that I've been pretty impressed. I know there's been a few instances where there's been a men's game right after a women's game, and so The Rock has come early and kind of stuck around through the women's and to the men's game. But even last night, it was a Monday evening, playing San Diego, a WCC team. Not a ton of hype around the game, but I mean there was a pretty decent showing from The Rock. You know, shout out to a couple of our own sports media students that were in the crowd there. Caleb Hatch hit a fun little trick shot to get like a free water bottle, I think. But yeah, there was a decent number of fans, so that's been cool. And the women's team is really good about engaging with those fans and making sure that they feel like it's worth it for them to come out. Always giving a message to the fans after the game, taking pictures with fans after the game. So it's really, I mean,
it's one thing to get fans there, but they got to keep them coming,
exactly.
and that's what the women's team does really
and they're
well.
doing it, and I think it's working.
I feel like their attendance is going up consistently, especially from the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
The kids game, I don't know if anything's ever going to beat that, but I'm really excited for the Gonzaga game in Provo.
Yeah.
There's been some recent history with Gonzaga. Obviously, in 2018, 2019, they swept them, including in the conference final when Gonzaga was heavily favored. John Stockton's daughter got hurt, and that was kind of a big storyline in that conference final game. And then last year at the buzzer beater. So those are kind of the 2 powerhouse programs of the WCC for women's basketball. BYU should always be favored in those matchups, but still it's rivalry basketball, and it's one of those things that I'm going to miss about going to the Big 12 is having that kind of recent history type deal with Gonzaga and with some of these other programs. Obviously, playing better teams in the Big 12 is going to be fun, but that recent history always adds a little bit of intrigue to every game, and so
for sure
we get to kind of taste the last bit of that this year, next year for men and women's basketball. So it'll be fun to see when Gonzaga comes to town, when BYU goes up to the Kennel, maybe if they meet in the conference final. I would not be surprised if BYU had to play San Diego again.
I was going to say that same thing.
In the conference tournament. Yeah. That would be, and I feel like that's a matchup that they're not going to want to engage in. Because
and that's the exact scenario that you brought up, right? Is like beating the team twice and then playing them again in the conference tournament. I thought about it, and I'm like, if they could do it twice in 3 days, I feel like the way they did it last night was pretty convincing.
They beat them more handily last night than they did the first time they played them. Which, granted, they're at home.
And it was right, exactly.
But I feel like not having a practice since the last game cancels out.
And coming out slow like they did. 12 points in the fourth. Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, tournament basketball, postseason basketball is a vacuum.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see what this team does. I expect nothing less of a conference championship.
Exactly.
Clearly.
And even going beyond that to the NCAA tournament, the team ends every practice with a Final Four chant. So it's very clear, what the goal is for this team. Obviously, they're going right through the conference tournament. They expect to be able to win that, show up for that, and it goes beyond that. It goes to the NCAA, getting past Sweet 16, Elite 8, and hopefully into the Final Four, which I think is possible. It's an incredible team. And you mentioned Gonzaga coming to town, switching gears a little bit to the men's team. They'll have Gonzaga come to the Marriott Center, not this week, but the following week, next week. So let's chat about the men a little bit. Still not ranked. I think maybe a few people surprised by that after some pretty solid victories last week. I believe they're in the 26th spot right now in the rankings, so just outside of the AP Top 25. But man, the best record through this many games in Mark Pope's career at BYU so far, with what has happened so far this season, is pretty insane to think about. And with the competition they've played as well, you talk about the WCC and how for the women it's not quite the strong schedule that it is for the men. For the men playing in teams like San Francisco and St. Mary's and Gonzaga, and then some of these other teams that have put up a good fight, even like Portland or other teams like San Diego, right? So. they're it's pretty impressive what Mark Pope's been able to do so far.
17-4 so far.
Yeah.
If you had told me that this team was going to be 17-4 at the beginning of the year, I might have believed you just because of how good we thought they were going to be going in. But then when you explained the circumstances that go along with that, I would not have believed you because, I mean, Mark Pope is really cementing himself as an all-time great BYU head coach every day, as we see. But this year especially, when you lose your two big men so early in the season with Richard Harward and Gavin Baxter, I mean, you saw in the Creighton game in December that size disadvantage really killed BYU. And I watched that and said, well, this is how it's going to be going forward. You know, it's going to be BYU getting bullied by a lot of bigger teams and really having to rely on shooting the three-pointer more than manufacturing points inside because, you know, Caleb Lohner was in a funk. The rotation was a little messy with bigs and whatnot. And then you go down to Hawaii and Foose just has his coming out party and becomes BYU's big man of the future. And even more than Foose, his roommate over at Merrill Hall, or Budge Hall, Atiki.
Yep.
Atiki has gotten 400% better throughout the season. It's amazing to see what meaningful minutes have done to his progression. And obviously what the coaches, we see him working with a lot of the coaches at practices, off to the side, doing his own thing. And it's been really impressive to see how much better he's gotten. Just that absolute slam that he threw down in transition against Portland off the Spencer Johnson assist was just kind of that moment like BYU has legit big men again. And Mark Pope took what was a huge disadvantage to his team and he turned it back into an advantage with pieces that he already had in his arsenal. And that's what a great coach does. You know, a great coach creates opportunities like that. I thought when Gavin Baxter went down, that was going to lose BYU a lot of games. And it did at first. But Foose has become possibly more valuable than Baxter was. And Atiki is, I mean, if he's swatting 4 blocks a game, you got to have that. And I feel like people are getting hot at the right time. Tijon Lucas is finding his scoring groove. Caleb Lohner is kind of finding that Tegan Graham role of just doing whatever it takes. If they need Caleb Lohner to score, he's going to score. If they need him to rebound, he's going to rebound. It might not be the same stat line every game. It might not be a consistent effort, but he's just doing what it takes. You saw that against San Francisco, where whatever the team needed at that time, he was going to do. Pope's obviously playing around with the rotations. He's always meddling with his starters and with his subs and what he does from a coaching perspective, but it's working. He pushes the right buttons. He knows basketball. He knows his personnel. And I think the most impressive thing that he's done is what he's done with Foose and Atiki because, like I said, they had no big men. Caleb Lohner is not a 5.
Yeah.
He's barely even a 3 or 4. He's kind of just this weird hybrid, but that doesn't make him a 5. And so that was putting BYU at a huge disadvantage. The development of Foose and Atiki could not have come at a better time. Coach Pope just waves his magic wand and things happen, and that's why they're 17-4 and why they should be ranked, in my opinion.
Yeah, you know, that was a great summary of kind of what we've seen from this team so far. As good as Alex Barcelo's been this season, it's pretty much out of the question now that the biggest story this season is Foose and Atiki. Foose primarily, you know, having stepped in as he has as a starter. He's been named West Coast Conference Freshman of the Week 3 times now. Yesterday, sharing the honors with Chet Holmgren from Gonzaga. So that's, you know, if you knew nothing else from this podcast, the fact that he was co-freshman of the week with Chet Holmgren is pretty dang impressive.
That's a big deal. That's a big freaking deal.
And it's going back to like what you mentioned. You know, if you had told me either before the season or, you know, at a certain point in the season that they'd be 17-4, you know, looking back at that stretch they had in late December, you know, obviously, you know, the loss to Utah Valley, not ideal, but then, you know, in the span of 4 games, lost to Creighton and Vanderbilt. And if you know, after that Vanderbilt game, I think, man, things were at an all-time low. If you had, you know, the program.
I thought the season was over.
Right, literally, right. And then you mentioned, you know, Foose did have a good showing in Hawaii. I think he was named. He won some award at that.
He was the all-conference or the all-tournament team.
There you go.
So because he got the big oar. And he said he was going to break in half.
I've seen the picture of the oar.
That oar is like so obnoxiously big. I don't know. I mean, I know Foose is a big dude.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, he's only 6'6". The way that how big he plays for being 6'6".
It's like a Charles Barkley like Shaq. Just like he's just
shout out Lee Kamard.
Just so. Just big body. Big body Keldon Johnson.
Big body. And he made that one layup off 1 foot where he kind of just came down awkwardly. That reminded me of Orlando Shaq. Ooh, obviously not as big as Shaq, but just like for how big but yet explosive and agile he is. I mean, he has all these intangibles that you need as a big man, and it's been amazing to see that, and to think he's only 6'6", and he's only a freshman. Like, good gracious, dude.
I just looked up how tall Shaq is. I didn't realize he was 7'1". Like that's just, like how wide he was, and the fact that he's also 7'1", that's just absurd. Imagine 7'1" Foose. Like
7'1" Foose might be the first overall pick in the draft. I'm not
literally
even kidding.
though. Yeah.
7'1" Foose might just snap Chet Holmgren in half.
Literally.
And by might, I mean would in
There's no question.
1,000% of the time. But yeah,
he just had his, I believe, 19th birthday over the weekend. So still super young. Hey, maybe he's not growing. Who knows? Maybe he'll be 6'7" by the end of the season. I don't know.
Goodness
It
gracious.
seems like he's getting bigger.
I mean, he lives with a tiki. Maybe some of that Atiki height
Kind of
just
rubs off.
on him. And Atiki's only, I think, 6'9", which we say only, but we're
Right.
not. We're not that tall compared.
I am not a tall person.
But just his wingspan, though. I think he's got a 7-foot wingspan.
Wow.
Dude, his reach is insane.
Yeah.
And another one of those, another guy with a huge wingspan, Gideon George,
Yep.
the third of the Africans on the roster. Very, very, very impressed with what Gideon George has done this year on both sides of the basketball. I feel like he's finding his three-point stroke.
Mm-hmm.
Gideon George has the nicest jumper of anyone on the team.
So clean.
It's so clean. I was doing videos for our social media
Yeah.
on the baseline last game, and he had one where he just popped a three, and it was one of the most satisfying shots I've ever seen. Because Barcelo, obviously, he's the shooter. He's the one who's going to make the majority of his shots. But I feel like there's nothing too special about his shot. But Gideon George, that's a basketball shot.
Seriously.
It is very satisfying to watch. So, and his defense, I feel like the lineup that is working for Pope right now is that Barcelo, Tijon, Trevin Nell, Loner, Foose starting five, and then you can bring Gideon George off the bench and kind of we've talked about this where for those first few minutes, Pope likes to sub quickly, and so for those first few minutes you see who's going to give you the most problems defensively, and then you sub accordingly and you put Gideon on whoever that is. And we saw that against Portland, we've seen that against other teams, and Gideon George has proven to be a very valuable asset to this team off the bench from a defensive perspective. Spencer Johnson as well. Spencer Johnson might be the best defender on the team just in terms of a pure defense standpoint. Coach Pope is always singing his praises. Tijon Lucas is kind of the quarterback of the defense. The defense has shown up when they've absolutely needed to. They're a great rebounding team. They swipe steals. They had against St. Mary's when St. Mary's really wanted to grind it out. They exploded. That was, I think, the statement win that they needed to kind of establish their footing, like where we should be respected within this conference. And then when San Francisco happened, it was, along with Gonzaga, we are the team to beat in the conference. Because after, like you said, after that Vanderbilt game, it was over. I was ready to give up on this team and just be all in for the women's team. But luckily, both teams are combined 33-5 right now, and we don't have to choose. We can love both of them because, and I think I've been talking for a while, but I think what's been really exciting about basketball at BYU this year is just how they're just two really fun teams. Because you look at the women's team, they're 16-1. They're just bulldozing opponents. They score and they score and they score. They score. They play high level defense. They shoot lights out. It is so much fun. And then you look at the men's team, and they're not bulldozing opponents. They're finding ways to win. They're crafty. They're gritty. They're either going to shoot 12% from three or 50% from three. So you never really know what to expect from the men's team, but you kind of have to expect that they're going to win every time they go out.
Right.
And so it's been really fun to see kind of these two spectrums of absolute dominant juggernaut that just steamrolls opponents versus the team that just finds ways to win. And if you're a basketball X's and O's guy, and I'm very interested in coaching personally, watching what Mark Pope does with substitutions, with scheme, just how and like we said, how he's kind of just like assembled a winning team within the pieces that he had is so impressive to me and so exciting. And so to be 33-5 over two teams, be 16th in the country in women's, men's should be ranked here soon, but they'll be ranked by season's end. You'd be hard pressed to find a more exciting time for basketball at BYU collectively.
Yep. And it's funny you mentioned that because at the game on Saturday, they honored the 1981 Elite Eight team, the men's basketball team. And there was an article that came out, kind of talking about that period of BYU athletics. You had Jim McMahon on the football team, Danny Ainge with basketball, and then the men's, I believe it was men's golf, won a national championship somewhere in that range of the early 80s as well. So then you fast forward to now, we're kind of seeing a little bit of similarities to what you saw there. with just how fun and good teams are on campus right now. And just even before we kind of move on from the men's team, I thought it's kind of interesting to mention, going back to that Vanderbilt loss. Since then, BYU 7-1, and early to begin the season, after the Utah Valley loss, they were 6-1. And so leading up, I mean, they were ranked number 12 in the nation, right? When going to that UVU game, 6-0. And we thought this team was amazing, one of the best teams in the nation, just doing incredible things. And for them to have the dip that they did and then come back and go 7-1 to even best that stretch that they had at the beginning of the season is pretty impressive. And to do it against a really, really good WCC. I think it's pretty much well known across the nation that this is the best the West Coast Conference has probably ever been. At least
4 tournament
BYU's
teams.
Been in it.
Oh,
exactly. Yeah. And so to do that, go 7-1 over this stretch and have the only loss beat at Gonzaga, extremely impressive. As Jaxson mentioned, will be ranked at some point, as long as the trajectory continues. And as long as Mark Pope is here, frankly, that's going to continue.
It's kind of shocking to me that they're not ranked. 17 wins is a big deal. Who they've beaten is a big deal. Yeah. The net rankings love them. BPI loves them. But I was looking at kind of where they should be ranked, per se. And of all NCAA Division I teams, BYU has played the 20th toughest schedule thus far. Wow. Which is kind of nuts. Coach Pope talked earlier in there. He's like, I'm going to get fired because I just want to just light it up, And that's exactly what they've done. They've played a top 20 schedule in terms of difficulty. And if you look at the teams above them, the top 25, there are 25 teams ranked ahead of BYU. Of those 25 teams, 17 of them have played weaker schedules in terms of difficulty thus far than BYU. And you look at that and you got to wonder, should BYU be ranked?
Somewhere the wires
got crossed. So I was shocked when they didn't end ranked. I thought that last week's 2 wins would be enough to get them over the hump. Clearly not. They've got to get ESPN only gives them a 45% chance of winning both games this week.
Okay.
It's 2 road matchups. It'll be interesting to see what they do, but I think next week BYU will be number 23 or so in the country. I would say that's a safe bet.
Yeah, I think this will be an important week for the men's team, just as it is for the women's team. Men going on the road, a real test for those 2 young big men, Atiki and Foose, to kind of show what they can do away from the Marriott Center. Obviously, they get just insane support and engagement from the Rock when they're here at home. Every time Foose does anything, you hear the big Foose from the Rock. It kind of sounds like a boo sometimes, so it can be a little misleading. But they are saying Foose. They sing happy birthday to him and everything. So obviously very loved here. But if they can go on the road and continue to develop and show that they belong at the top of the WCC, I think that'll be a big benchmark for this team. So definitely something to watch.
Yeah, and in terms of, like you said, the Rock has just become obsessed with Foose.
Yeah.
One of the most fun things about this basketball team right now is how they've kind of taken on a life of their own. The fans are in it, per se. I wasn't here Pope's first year with Toulson and Hawes and Yoli, but I remember the year before, Dave Rose's last year, they had TJ Hawes and Yoli Childs, two BYU basketball greats, and people still they didn't mean as much to fans and to the school around campus as Foose or Barcel or Caleb Lohner do. I feel like Caleb Lohner's kind of just become this rock star on BYU campus. Everybody's screaming his name. People are making signs for him. Every girl on campus wants Caleb Lohner. I was at.
We can do a quick poll of the newsroom, see if it's actually true. But.
We'll broadcast story. But last night for my family home evening, what we did is everybody had to make a PowerPoint and present a PowerPoint about anything. And this one girl did a PowerPoint, and it was just me ranking the hottest BYU athletes. And every slide, there were 20 slides, and it was just Caleb Lohner on every one. And so, Caleb Lohner's just kind of become this rock star on campus. People love him. He's the Michelangelo's David, according to ESPN, or Hercules, whatever you want to call him. Foose is, people got Molly flags in the stands. They're chanting his name. They're doing the Foose chant. They're singing happy birthday to him. Alex Barcelo is just, the one word I would use to describe Alex Barcelo is clout, per se. That's...
not the first one I would have thought of, but it's good.
And he just seems like, he just looks like, he doesn't look real. Like he's got just the crazy haircut.
Got like an action figure vibe or something.
He's action figure. He's like a G.I. Joe, you know? And so, you got these kind of figures, these characters on BYU's team that are becoming larger than life. And a lot of it is one, Mark Pope being larger than life himself, not only being an NBA center at one point, but being just an absolute
in who he is,
absolute mad scientist, just always unhinged, for lack of a better term. But I feel like the style of basketball that they play, it's this never say die. It's dramatic. They play with a certain flair to where guys like Fusa Barcelo take on a life of their own, and Caleb Lohner especially when you're playing. It's just I feel like they have this kind of nice mix between old school, just gritty gym rat basketball and the new school of we're going to knock down threes and we're going to play excellent transition defense and whatnot. And so it's fun to watch.
And you look at how many like mid-range jumpers Alex Barcelo takes, for example. Like that's very old school. And I would say Alex Barcelo in general has a pretty old school game. You know, a lot of defense, a lot of gritty, kind of get in the paint kind of play. But at the same time is the best shooter in the nation and can hit threes from
anywhere.
Steph, Lillard, Trae Young range, whatever you want to call it. These are Jimmer range. I guess we should call it Jimmer range, right? Barcelo range.
Toulson range.
A lot of range out here. And then you look at a guy like Foose who reminds us of old school Shaq, Charles Barkley kind of vibe. So it's a super fun team to watch. I definitely agree. Have that blend of kind of old school, new school, and Mark Pope is just like you mentioned, just a thing of his own, and is bringing in a lot of that newness though. Mentioned recently that the program has gone entirely paperless. Going carbon neutral as it were. They're pushing P. So he's bringing in Gunna lyrics to press conferences.
Bringing in Crumble to press conferences, we are very, very appreciative of.
There's a lot going on, and you need to stay tuned to Universe Sports Talk so you can know everything that's going on, including the last topic that we're going to cover, which is
we've all been waiting for,
football related. Little guy, he might be short according to some people, but Jaxson Dart apparently made a visit to BYU last week. Jackson and I went on the hunt to find out where the visit was happening.
We swarmed.
Could not find him. Yeah, we swarmed the story.
But boy, did we try to find him.
No luck, but some pictures came out on Instagram after of him and his brother in BYU uniforms. There's been a little bit of buzz kind of just around the team and around BYU in general about what it would take to get him here, what it would look like if he did come here. Coming from Corner Canyon, being a Utah guy.
BYU's his first offer too.
Right, BYU's first offer, and Corner Canyon also known for obviously the Wilson family. Zach coming from there, his brother Josh, who's currently on the team, and Micah, who will be joining the team this coming season as well. So kind of a lot of connections there, potential for, I think more of an attraction for Dart than a lot of people outside of Utah might think. Obviously, you talk about schools like Oklahoma and Ole Miss that he has obviously visited, taken pictures at. Apparently are in the top two of his choices. We do not pretend to know exactly where he's going to go or what's going to happen. We don't know if BYU is actually in his option, but we're just saying that he took the visit apparently, and in our opinion, there are reasons that can make it attractive.
I did hear from sources, #sources, that he has been discussing things with the Wilson brothers about living together in Provo.
Interesting.
Should that be the case?
Yeah.
Should he make BYU his destination? Not confirmed how solid that might be.
We're still working on more sources.
Working on more sources, but we're hearing things. So
yeah, there's definitely buzz.
There's buzz, and BYU is a legitimate option for Jaxson Dart. Yeah. And you know what? You look at some of these other USC would offer stability. He gets to go be with Lincoln Riley, who's one of the best head coaches in the world. Stay where he's at, be in LA.
Yep.
But I don't even know if he's even left the door open to return to USC, kind of what Caleb Williams did at Oklahoma. If he goes to Oklahoma, it's a little bit more messy just because it's a new head coach, new regime. They're going into the SEC eventually. I don't know exactly when because they're going to be in the Big 12 with BYU for a bit. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if Dart will stick around for that. You could go to Ole Miss, but again, it's the SEC. Would Jaxson Dart at Ole Miss ever compete for a conference title?
Yeah.
Because, you look, Alabama and Georgia were the national title game. Auburn has a good program. LSU could. Yep. Who knows what Brian Kelly's going to do there? It's Brian Kelly, right? Mm-hmm. From Notre Dame. The SEC is too unpredictable. If Matt Corral, who might be the first quarterback taken in this draft, can't go to an SEC title game at Ole Miss, is Jaxson Dart going to?
Yeah.
I mean, so you look at BYU, and then Aaron Roderick is the quarterback whisperer. BYU has two quarterbacks starting in the NFL right now, and Zach Wilson and Taysom Hill. Zach Wilson, who literally played at the same high school as Jaxson Dart, maybe didn't have as much recruiting fanfare as Dart did, but he was the 2nd overall pick at BYU. Jaxson Dart could do the same thing. And you look at Aaron Roderick, Wilson, BYU's offense, I think, over the past 2 years, BYU's offense has 60-something passing touchdowns and I think 8 interceptions.
Wow.
Which is absurd. That's Aaron Roderick's fingerprints all over the offense. Jaxson Dart's biggest issue last year was interceptions. If Jaxson Dart wants to become an NFL quarterback, he's got to limit turnovers. And where's the best place he could limit turnovers?
Yeah.
It's Provo, Utah. It's with
P-Tone.
Because especially when they go to the Big 12, because the Big 12 is not known for defense.
Right.
The Big 12 is a passing league. What is the SEC known for? One word, defense.
Yeah.
So should he come to BYU, he'd get to work with Aaron Roderick. That might keep Roderick here longer because,
True.
you know, he's on a lot of people's radars as an up-and-comer. But it's – and also you got Jaron Hall. I don't know what they would do quarterback competition-wise, but could you imagine that quarterback room just in general?
It's a good problem to have.
Jaron Hall, who some people have pegged as a potential first-round draft selection. Jaxson Dart, best quarterback prospect on the planet a year ago. Jacob Conover, a 4-star recruit, had an Alabama offer. Nick Saban was literally in his home.
Yep.
And then Cade Fennegan, who lit up the practice squad this year, is also a very solid option at quarterback. Was at Boise State, you know. That's a great passing school. So they have 4 legitimate guys who could start at any point, and so
Division I starters
that could start anywhere else. And so for me at least, I think Jaron Hall being there as well would be a great mentoring opportunity. That Dart would be hard pressed to turn that down, even if there is a competition, even if they ask Dart to redshirt, which would be absurd.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just
I don't know if that would happen, especially considering obviously he didn't even at going to USC where he was pegged as the 3rd stringer, and then obviously ended up playing, but he didn't redshirt at USC, so I can't imagine it would happen here at BYU. So in my opinion, there's kind of 2 factors here that will be the dominoes or whatever X factors and what happens with Jaxson Dart. Number 1, we got to figure out where Caleb Williams is going, right? The former Oklahoma quarterback is in the transfer portal. A lot of people think he's just going to go to USC to follow Lincoln Riley, his Oklahoma coach. He could just as easily return to Oklahoma, or he could go to USC. I think if he decides he's going to go to USC, then okay, Jaxson Dart's for sure not going back to USC. And then I think the other factor would be, where's Jaxson Dart's mind at right now? What are kind of his priorities, I guess? You mentioned the NFL aspect of having a guy like Zach Wilson go 2nd overall. I think that's the number 1 pitch you got to make to Jaxson Dart, right? Is we can turn you into a first-round quarterback. But along with that, going along with the mindset and kind of his priorities, you got to talk about the church as well. You have a guy like Jaron Hall, who's a return missionary, Jacob Conover, return missionary. Kalani Sitake obviously promotes that culture of loving and learning and being active in the church and in the gospel. So I think if that is at the top of Jaxson Dart's priorities, we know he follows the church on Instagram, is a member, he's from Utah. If that is at near the top of his priorities, I think that's got to be a pretty strong pull for him.
Absolutely. I think that's a part that people are overlooking a little bit because, it used to be back in the day, if you were a great LDS athlete, you ended up at BYU. Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore with the Big 12. I think that's going to change up a little bit.
Oh, for sure.
I think BYU and Utah are always going to be leading the pack with LDS athletes because you look at all these return missionaries on Stanford. If BYU had been in the Big 12, would all of them be at Stanford? One of them is already at BYU.
I was going to say, you look at Houston. Yeah.
So if BYU had been in the Big 12, would Tanner McKee have come to BYU instead of Stanford? Granted, we wouldn't have had Zach Wilson, but
right.
we would have had to wait longer for the Tanner McKee show. But, and I think one of the other big draws that BYU might offer for Jaxson Dart is Jaron Hall's injury history is very suspicious.
Yeah.
He's never played a full season.
Yep.
When he's on the field, he's incredible. I mean, we could talk for hours about how underrated Jaron Hall is.
Yeah.
I personally am a huge Jaron Hall supporter, as I think everybody else should be. And now that Baylor Romney's out of the picture, I don't think anybody should be anti-Jaron Hall. If anybody tries to argue Jacob Conover over Jaron Hall, I will slap them in the face. And you can put that as your social clip.
I stand by.
I stand by it. But that injury history, for me, as an NFL draft scout looking at Jaron, it concerns me.
For sure.
But as
someone potentially
coming in,
right.
I would be stoked because
you're going to play.
You're going to play.
Yeah, pretty much guaranteed.
And I think, when in 2019, when Zach, his first, what should have been his first full year as the starter, obviously Baylor and Jaron played at times. Aaron, I talked to Coach Roderick before the season. He knew that he had Zach and he had Jaron. Those are 2 incredible athletes with NFL potentials. And so at the beginning of the year, they would run these gadget plays with Jaren Hall. They found ways to get Jaren Hall on the field.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're going to go a 2-quarterback system. That never works. But I would be shocked if somehow Jaxson Dart ends up at BYU and Jaren Hall's a starter, if they don't find ways to use both of them
Interesting.
in some way.
Yeah.
I'd be shocked if Jaxson Dart just held a clipboard the whole season.
Yeah.
But I'm shocked that BYU went 10-2 this year. And I'm shocked that they lost to UAB. So
There's a lot of things that could happen, certainly. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that situation. Certainly stay tuned to our social channels as we update you on that situation, but also all the other sports happenings going on around BYU campus. And yeah, that's pretty much the topics we wanted to cover for today. We'll try and keep coming back at you guys more consistently. Get one going later this week, hopefully as well. And always bring you guys the latest on our social channels. Check out Daily Universe Sports on Instagram and Twitter. So,
sorry, peace out.
See you guys later.